am based I'm based here in Philadelphia, and I've been here for a few years, working predominantly as a freelance musician. I do a lot of mixing and recording. I do some teaching. I was teaching at a college down in North Carolina for a little while, and now I'm here in Philly, and I'm loving it. And I organize on the side. I also organize a lot for the animals, for animal rights, for animal welfare. Those two things are slightly different, but they are still they're intertwined, and that comes along through as the questions you were asking me before. A lot of this is intertwined with my music and my understanding of animal rights, of animal welfare, and of human rights and human welfare as well, because all of these things are intertwined for me. So I'll answer some questions I'm sure that will come up about music and how that relates, but specifically when we think about animals and our relationship with the animal world and planet Earth and nature in general, plants, other living and breathing beings, typically and I don't want to generalize, but typically we have a hierarchy of companion animals, endangered animals being untouchable. Those kind of animals we don't like to see as commodity. However, upwards of 3+ times a day, many of us, as a matter of fact, the majority of us in Western society, uh, can turn the other cheek. Maybe that's the wrong thing. We can turn an eye away and not think about the body on our plate. And when we try to practice nonviolence, when we try to practice compassion and empathy, I like to think of these small actions adding up. All of these tiny little things, the things that we choose to support financially, and sometimes it can feel very fraught to participate in consumer side activism, right? Because it just doesn't feel like we are doing anything. But it is a personal ethical choice of, are we giving money to industries that promote slaughter at the very worst, but also torture, forced impregnation, and just any kind of thing unimaginable, So if you've seen any of these videos from, I know some PETA videos were mentioned earlier, or from the Humane League, or from Mercy for Animals, or Anonymous for the Voiceless, or any kind of these organizations where individuals will go in with cameras and film what goes on in slaughterhouses and concentrated animal feeding operations. When people view those, I've yet to meet someone who hasn't had a visceral reaction and a very deep reaction against what's going on. And clearly we're not going to show any of that today. And I always like to have consent when when showing those. I don't like to approach people and say, hey, now we're going to watch this. But I encourage people to witness what's happening, because I think the idea of witnessing, the experience of witnessing something like that, can fundamentally change you and shed light on a deeper meaning of empathy, more than just for your fellow human being, but for every living thing on this planet. And so I know in the writing that you did to introduce this talk today, you said something like animal rights organizers and activists are sometimes seen as crazies who liberate animals from university labs, and I do think that is maybe some people's perception of what animal rights organizers do. But it's also in the education sphere of having talks like this. I'll have discussions at universities and high schools, even, where I'm doing these humane education presentations and having discussions. And so I think that's a huge part of it, is talking to people one-on-one. And I'll go through a little bit of some talking points today in this first part of the talk, but really I would like to open this up for a discussion where there's a lot of questions, because I do feel like that's the most beneficial for this topic in particular, is to answer as many questions as I can, as best I can. But our relationship to food, our relationship to the living planet, and how we engage with it is a very personal thing. So sometimes numbers and facts and data can hit with some people, and sometimes it doesn't land with other people. But I do encourage, folks to, it's readily available on the internet. And I can provide some links to some documentaries or some documentary footage and some undercover footage after this talk, if anybody would like to reach out to me, or I can share some to be sent out. That will have it is graphic in nature, so I can warn you now. But it's important to understand where your food comes from if you are indeed consuming animal products. So I guess to preface it, I just want to touch on a couple things I can share my story toward veganism and animal rights activism, and I can talk about the three main areas that I don't want to say convert people or turn people into vegan or vegetarian, or turn people into animal rights activists or organizers. But I can share my story very briefly, and it's never just one event, but I can share one event that was fundamentally changing, that fundamentally changed my perception of my relationship to food, my relationship to animals. And that would be when I was a teenager. I was about 15, maybe I was 16. I would go to a lot of rock shows. And I went to a rock show, and it was this little punk band that played just a little house show. And before they started playing, the singer went up to the microphone and said, "I cannot practice compassion while ignoring a body on my plate." Then they began to sing and play their whole night of music. And the entire time I was enjoying the music, I could not stop thinking about that one line. And several decades later, I'm still telling people about this one line. That's how impactful it was, that one moment. And I was already flirting with vegetarian diets and giving up meat. I was not doing it. I mean, there was a convenience argument that we can get into of maybe it was more difficult to have that kind of diet as a teenager when you have a little bit less agency than you do as an adult living on your own. But just that one line stuck out to me of I wanted to be a compassionate person. I want to be an empathetic person. I want to live the best life I can while having other individuals and beings live the best life they can without competing and without getting in their way. And so that was kind of the final straw that broke the camel's back, to use that turn of phrase. That got me to fully commit to going vegetarian as a teenager. And within a month or two, I was volunteering with PETA, and I was volunteering with some other animal rights organizations. Again, I was a minor, so I could only do so much. But we were doing animal liberation, which wasn't the best thing in the world to do, and it's not something in my older years that I am doing anymore because it is not legal. I think I have a what is that called, a statute of limitations. I think I passed that. Maybe I can admit to those crimes. But it's very important to me to have what is called veg advocacy, and that's advocating for people to adopt a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle because of the impact that it will have over your life, and because it is the one thing that will reduce harm to animals. If I can turn everyone into an animal rights activist, that'd be great. But if everyone was an animal rights activist, we wouldn't need animal rights activists. It should be a movement that wants to die. I don't want to organize for the animals anymore because I don't want them to be harmed. And that goes for companion animals, but specifically in the agriculture system, the animal agriculture system. So for me, the empathetic argument, the animal empathy kind of wing of animal rights organizing is what got me into it, wanting to live a compassionate lifestyle, totally from ethics. And that can reach some people. It's a very emotional thing, but not everyone can be swayed with that. So the other two branches of kind of divesting, not investing, but divesting from animal agriculture would be the environment. So animal agriculture's impact on climate change and the destruction of the natural world. And the third branch, the third wing of animal rights organizing would be, or veganism we can call it, would be health, which I don't really like to touch on too much because it's personal and it deals with your personal health issues. But there is plenty of science out there that backs that a vegan lifestyle is not only uh, totally calorically sufficient and dense, but also nutritionally dense and full of all the vitamins and minerals that you need. You will not die from protein deficiency. I don't. I'm still fine today. I have all of my teeth and then some. I don't break any bones. I recover very quickly. And that's anecdotal, but your health will greatly benefit from it. And there's plenty of research out there that I could point you to. But the one thing I would like to talk about beyond ethics, and I think that's where we could open the discussion up for some questions, but would be the environment and human. And in the environment, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the human impact, global impact of global food insecurity. So specifically, when we look at climate change and the role that humans play in it, typically we have the big boogeyman, which is fossil fuels, big oil. They are guilty of a lot of things. That industry is not good. We should not be participating in it. We should divest from that. However, the most impactful, which is a negative impact, the most impact that humans have on climate change is through our food system. It is through animal agriculture. And that comes from a variety of sources. The joke is always, oh, it's cow farts. It's not just cow farts. That makes up a fraction of a percentage that is whatever. Cows are going to fart. It comes from soil erosion, our use of factory farming, which is beyond just animal agriculture, but also the grain agriculture that we have in order to produce the feed for animals. And so when we think about the food supply and the food chain, we're growing food to feed to animals, to then slaughter, to then feed ourselves. And when we look at the numbers, over 70% of all global grain is fed to animals raised for food. 7D, not 17, 70% of all global grains are fed to animals. And when there is a caloric calculator of how many calories of grain does it take to create 1 calorie of egg, beef, chicken, pork, all of that, and all of them are in the hundreds. So it takes hundreds of calories of grain to create 1 calorie of animal byproduct. So we have this inefficient way of raising food that has a lot of waste, that has a lot of soil erosion, that has a lot of pollution, that has a lot of deforestation. So when we look at deforestation, for example, we often think of the Amazon rainforest being torn down for, I don't know, maybe paper. That was always the boogeyman in the 80s and 90s. Oh, we have to stop using paper. We have to digitize things. We have this digital thing. So now stop using paper. Let's recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle. Well, maybe it's lumber also taking down trees. Well, that's not really the case. In the Amazon rainforest in South America alone, every 3 minutes, one NFL football-sized football field is torn down. Every 3 minutes, one football field is eroded by humans 24/7, 365. So in the course of this discussion, there's been, what time is it now? There have been 5 football fields taken down, going on 6 football fields being destroyed in the Amazon rainforest right now. 94% of all football fields destroyed in the Amazon rainforest are used for animal agriculture. 94% are used for animal agriculture. So when we look at the number one reason of deforestation in our rainforest, and that also, the number is slightly different in the Indonesian rainforest, and I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it's also an egregious number as well. When we think about deforestation, when we think of the lack of trees that we have in this planet, it comes 94% in one area at least, the most densely forested area in the globe, from animal agriculture, so that we can feed 70% of the grains to these animals that are crammed into small cages, that are malnourished, that are forcibly impregnated, that are tortured for their entire short fraction of their life, to then be slaughtered and shipped to us to enjoy on a hamburger at a McDonald's. And for that to clog our heart and arteries, for us then to pay, doctors and big pharma to correct that. All the while, we can send money to organizations that fight global food insecurity or world hunger. We currently produce enough food globally as humans to feed the entire world population of 7 billion people 2.5 times over. But if you do the math, and we feed 70% of the majority of our crops to animals, that number is dramatically decreased to less than feeding 1 times the whole population, which is why a reason, not the only reason why we have global food insecurity. There are other industrial kind of factors at play, and global capitalism is benefiting off of the backs of people going hungry, so that we can create the supply and demand, we can give to the few. But a big part of this is animal agriculture. So if we could all think about that when we go to the grocery store, when we go to restaurants, when we advocate for the food that's on our plate, it's not to guilt ourselves and say, oh, well, if I eat a cheeseburger, it's contributing to global food insecurity, it's contributing to climate change. It's what can I do to reduce my impact, my negative impact on that? We can turn it positively. And one other thing I'll say about the environment is this study that came out of Stanford University. I believe it was in 2018 or 2019, but you can look it up. There's a study out of Stanford that states if the global population went vegan over the course of 15 years, 5 years, 1.5 decades, so that would be about 1 meal per year, we commit to going vegan. Not very tough, right? It will have the same positive impact on global climate change, meaning we reduce the amount of carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, as divesting immediately from fossil fuels for the same period of 70 years. So in the year 2094, if we cut cold turkey fossil fuels right now, it will have the same impact as 2039 of us gradually going plant-based. I know which one I would take, and it doesn't have to be an either or, it's a both and. We can divest and find renewable energy sources and divest from animal agriculture while feeding the world population and restoring our environment and our planet. And with that, just because I think, although I came from the ethical side of the thinking empathetically about animals, the thing that really hooks me is the environment, because it's not only what impacts us day to day. I mean, for those of us in the Philly area, we can smell the wildfires that are going on. At least I could. And I'm reminded of that when talking to people about what they eat. But it's the thing that sustains us going forward. I have a young daughter, and I think, what planet is she going to inherit if we don't start changing something now for it to make it better? So hopefully that was just enough kind of little hints at things and some data that may help and some talking points. But I really, if that's okay, to open it up for a discussion and some questions.
Anyone? But I want to know how old you are. You've got to be older than you look. I would say, looking at you, you look about 25.
I'm not. You have to add a decade onto that.
Okay, all right, 35. You're doing well. Okay,
oh, thank you.
There you are. What a poster child for veganism. Yeah, that's great. You're very healthy, clearly, and that of course is one of the things about being plant-based. Now, I can remember there was when I was a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania, there was this young woman going around saying it's not cool just to care about animals that are photogenic. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, it's the cop-out answer is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So every animal is photogenic. But I know what you mean. I know what you mean. The cute
Good
animals
answer.
are the ones that we want to protect.
Yeah.
We look at dogs and cats and we think, oh, they're so cute, they're so sweet. I mean, pigs are cute, I think. Cows are very cute. Um, but it's a out of sight, out of mind. And so when we don't think about the impact, when we don't think about these animals as living beings, when we think about them as leather handbags and as hamburgers and cheeseburgers and as milkshakes and slices of cheese, that's they're not an animal. They're a product. And some people will say a byproduct of something. So they become commodities. But it's not, you know, we should be able to separate a hierarchy of cuteness or a hierarchy of being photogenic. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Alistair's father was a German scientist in Germany and an active, very active athlete. And he got Parkinson's, which is very prevalent in people of he was born in 1941. So people of his age, there's an enormous amount of Parkinson's in Germany. And apparently it comes from the fertilizers on the fields, because he used to, I mean, all weekends he would ride bicycles all the way around the Black Forest. And see, that's another thing too. When you're growing animal feed, of course, in Germany, in that area of Black Forest, there's an enormous amount of cows too. So they have to feed them, and they, yeah.
it's a highly inefficient way to have a food system. It's very, very inefficient. And with the global population increase at the rate it has increased over the last century, it is unsustainable. It's just not possible. We think of Old MacDonald had a farm, and it's this beautiful, cute, quaint red farm with a dozen cows on it that want to be milked. And at the end of their long life, the farmer comforts them and then humanely puts them out of their misery. But in reality, cows can live several decades, and they're only living 5 or 6 years. And the female cows are having several calves in that span, and they don't want to. They're being forced to do this because that's the only way for them to produce milk.
Yeah, in Sweden, I was working for a while on some cows, and they take the baby away from the mother immediately, and because they want to keep the mother producing milk.
Mhm.
And then after 3 years, they chop up the mother.
That's usually when they become unproductive.
Yeah, like I was told, yeah, it's a hard life for a cow. It's like, yeah, in Sweden. Yeah, I mean, there are other cows that are only used for milk, and there are cows that are only used for leather. But in Sweden, they use everything.
Well, I mean,
Shocking. Yeah.
when a cow dries up, they're
Yeah.
using the remains of that cow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sure, there are some raised just for their flesh or their skin, but some are used, at the end of their life, they become a different type of commodity because they have given all that they can. And when we use terms like leather, I mean that is the appropriate term, but it's the cow's skin.
Right.
When you use
Yeah.
the term beef, it's the cow's flesh.
Right. Yeah.
It's taken from them without consent. They don't willingly give give this. And people always think that's kind of a joke and kind of funny, but I don't know. It's just not. I don't think it's funny. To answer your question of why do I care? I just
Oh,
don't think it's that funny. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions actually. One question is for myself, and one question is related to this matter we're talking about. I have a bit of a mouse problem in my apartment building, but I won't kill them, and I won't call the exterminator. Am I letting myself in for disease and things like that?
I mean, I don't think it's probably great for you, but there are humane traps,
Okay.
and most exterminators will not be kind about that. But there are humane traps, which would just take a lot of effort
I'll look into that. Yeah, I just don't like killing anything. I just don't, you know, I'm guilty of eating hamburgers and everything. I'll tell you that. Yeah. My second question is, it sounds like the industry is as wasteful as most industries are. Is what you were trying to project to me or to us. What would be the economic reason that we could offer as an alternative to the people that are in these industries? You know, did I come clear?
What is the alternative kind of path for these people in terms of industry for jobs?
Yes, for jobs, for
Yeah.
commodity, for economics. You know, I know a lot of it is wasteful, but they're still raking in the dough.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Okay.
So I wonder if the same questions were asked of lamplighters. What do we do now that we have electricity? You know, once something better is proven to be more viable, something phases out. And for a long time, we've had this not be viable. It's just taken by storm. And again, not to get into like economic politics and things like that.
Right.
It is profitable for some people, not everyone. And if you ask farmers, specifically those in animal agriculture, it is human exploitation as much as it's animal exploitation. Where for Tyson chicken, for example, Tyson will say, "Oh, great, we'll sign a contract with you, Farmer Joe, and we'll provide you with the CAFO housing and the chicken feed, which you have to buy directly from us, and we'll provide you with the chicks, and you will raise them with our chicken feed and with your own water that you provide on your land, and we'll sell this to you for $1 million." All right. So we provide the infrastructure and you can pay us monthly in installments with a tiny bit of interest. Farmer Joe goes, "Great. I've always wanted to farm chickens. Sign me up because you're giving me the keys to the kingdom," right? So month one rolls by, they're feeding, they're spending money. They go, "Great. We got these chickens. Send them off to slaughter." They bring in the slaughter team, which is again, predominantly made up, maybe I didn't mention this, but it's predominantly made up by undocumented individuals who, at the end of their productivity, when they have been demoralized, and I have seen this, as I mentioned, I lived in North Carolina for a while. I would see ICE go by and round up all of these people at the end when they have lacked productivity. And so guess what? Their final paychecks, Tyson gets to keep. The farmer gets to keep. But going back to this economic kind of cycle, so at the end of the month, the team comes in to collect all the chicks or the hens at this point for slaughter. And Tyson has a big stack of bills, and they go, "Okay, here you go for this many chickens. Oh, but you owe us this much for the infrastructure, the monthly payment, and the chick feed." So Farmer Joe then pays back Tyson, who just gave them the paycheck, and they're left with
Nothing.
poverty wages.
Yeah.
And they're barely paying these workers that are predominantly undocumented because, again, that's the cheapest labor force that they're exploiting and then calling them to deport them afterward. I mean, it's just a cycle of abuse. So the hard workers, the blue collar workers, the farmers are actually not, it's not beneficial for them to work this. So to get further into the politics of this,
are they caught in a cycle? Are they caught?
You're caught in a cycle of poverty
You're
and of
giving money,
exploitation.
and then
You can never pay it off. You can never pay it off. But people are duped into it. It's like multi-level marketing. You know, sell these kitchen knives and you'll be a millionaire. But the reason why it is as bad as it currently is in this situation is because of government subsidies of these industries. So you can look at the fiscal year every year when the numbers are released. You can Google this. This is free public data. Over 50% of all, animal agriculture profits come from government subsidies. In the fiscal year 2021, I believe it was like 52%, something along those lines, of all of their profits. So my tax dollars are going to Tyson Chicken, and US beef and all of these things that they're getting paid by Uncle Sam, and they're getting paid by the farmers, and they're getting paid by us, which is why McDonald's hamburgers are so cheap, because it's subsidized by the US government. So how could we give our tax dollars to the rightful owners of this labor, the farmers and the slaughterhouse workers? Well, we shift the industry from an exploitation industry of both humans and animals. We shift them from using that land for destructive purposes, for slaughtering purposes, and we can shift them to reforest and steward our land to provide healthier oxygen, healthier soil, healthier water, and we can create government jobs with land stewards. And guess how much our taxes would raise? $0, because 51% of the billions of dollars these industries have could be paid to thousands and thousands of workers to reforest our land. And you could think of them as park rangers, where they're taking these farms that are completely depleted of all resources and nutrients, plant a forest, tend to it, help nature reclaim its rightful place. And we can live harmoniously with the land and with animals. And they would actually get a government job with government benefits and a pension and all of the good things that come from with it. Instead of, Tucker Carlson, who is the heir to the Tyson chicken fortune, getting billions of dollars or millions and millions of dollars a year compounded, exploiting the lives of chickens and pigs and cattle and the hardworking labor of farmers and undocumented individuals too. If that answers your question a little bit. I mean, that was like a hypothetical pathway forward, but
That does very much, because usually when people approach me with these issues, they say we have to do something, and I'm saying, what are you gonna, the farmer's trying to make a buck, everybody's trying to make a buck, they got to survive. What is the resources that we can give them alternatively to make that shift, without them going under? I'm not talking, I don't care if Tyson's chicken goes under, but I mean the farmers then,
And again, the farmers could also switch to a sustainable, dare I even say organic, which is like kind of a dirty word, because conventional can also be fine too, but a plant agriculture. And again, it's not profitable if we can sell things and have a surplus. We need to have a deficit in order to raise prices. So again, we could feed the entire global population 2.5 times over, but we choose not to. Because the system works for a small number of individuals at Tyson and other companies.
Now, is there a lobby group?
Of course, yeah. In the U.S. government, I can speak. There is most politicians are in the pocket of big ag.
What about for animals? I mean,
no, there are none.
Well, that's what's needed.
Who benefits from that besides the animals? I mean, nobody. You can't line pockets with that. If Tyson has a lobby for the Midwest and the US South to have this industry be practiced, Tyson gets money from government, from the individuals, from everything, and then they can take a fraction of that, kick it to, I mean, even people like Tim Walz. He's in the pocket of big ag. As much as we may support Tim Walz, he's in the pocket of big ag. Like, I have an issue with that. I have an issue with Ted Cruz, and I have an issue with whoever. It doesn't matter what political party you are. I have an issue with those who are in the pocket of big ag, because they're not in the interest of the U.S. climate, the U.S. health, or working people, or the animals, clearly. But it's all profit-based. I mean, a lobby is purely based on profits. Well, not purely. Most of the time.
You're talking about overcoming world hunger, which is a very important thing. I mean, there have to be organizations that are interested in that. I mean, maybe if you come at it from a different angle, instead of saying, well, we care about the animals, and in other words, say, well, we care about the people, which of course is, so that's actually very interesting. Does anyone have some, I see a lot of people have been silent. Alistair, do you have anything to say about being vegan? Alistair, are you awake? Or Donna? Do you have some, or Michael? Or Chris? Michael.
I'll jump in here. Can people hear me right now?
Yeah,
we're
you can switch your computer, turn it around. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, anybody I don't know, Thompson, friend Josh. And,
Yeah, the sound is really horrible. We can't really hear you. Yeah.
okay, let me mess with some things. I'll jump in a minute.
Okay. What about Lois?
Hmm.
Oh, Alistair, are you there now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a comment about why you're plant-based and
Or vegan. It's
vegan?
not quite the same thing. Plant-based usually refers to just diet. So people who say like, oh, I'm going vegan, but I'm just in terms of food,
Okay.
not in terms of like what you wear and what you do, anything that you might support animal abusing or using animals in any way that wouldn't benefit themselves. But yeah, I agree for pretty much everything that I've heard.
And you've been vegan since you were 16.
Yeah, since 2006.
Yeah.
So almost 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 2006. I remember
Yeah,
you coming home from camp and saying, nope, just fry some onions and mushrooms. And I nearly fell over backwards. It's like, what? You know?
Yep.
And I know your brothers teased you mercilessly, but you've stuck with it.
Yeah, well, it wasn't completely out of nowhere. I mean, Angus was a vegetarian once, I guess.
Well, he is again. That's my eldest son is vegetarian.
Yeah.
And the other two
Which
are
I know is not the
carnivores.
same.
Yeah.
That tends to be the default for a lot of people. Oh, I care about animals. I'm going to become vegetarian, and then just stop there. And it's a starting step, but it's just like when you learn more about the animal agriculture industry and everything, the dairy industry is part of that. It's a big part of that. It's not like two separate things of like, this factory is the one where we just take our cows and just take their milk, and this is the one where we slaughter the cows. It's like it's all connected.
Yeah, and I think it's an important distinction to make. And I guess for me, I like the distinction personally, but when I'm talking to people who were interested, I think a lot of the criticism of the animal rights movement or the vegan movement or the veg advocacy movement, however we want to label this, is that it can be very preachy and it can be very judgy and it can cast a lot of guilt or shame. And I never like to approach it that way when I'm talking to somebody interested in maybe divesting from the animal agriculture industry. And if vegetarian is where you need to be at the current moment, I love to meet people where they are. If you can go vegan a couple of nights a week for dinners, that's great. If you can make progress, it's about progress, not purity. But it is a good distinction to make because there's a lot of plant-based people who wear leather jackets and leather handbags and things like that. And, sometimes winning that last 5% is the toughest 5%, but it's a worthy cause to shoulder.
I believe the definition changed though. I believe vegetarian used to mean entirely plant-based. And then they added eggs and chicken and and milk and dairy. So suddenly then there had to be another word for people who had no animals in their diet or no animal exploitation is really what it's all about.
Yeah. Depending on who you ask, fish is also a plant. So
I remember hearing about Buddhists. I think are they Jains? I'm not sure.
Jains, yeah.
Jains. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
who won't step on a bug or swat a mosquito, and that's pretty terrific. But I don't like being bitten by mosquitoes. And also mice too. I mean, I have a cat, and my cat is quite wonderful, but he loves getting rid of mice in my house and or outside. So what am I going to do? Blame the cat for being a cat?
No, that's a lot of people will say, well, lions eat meat. We're not lions. You know? Um, so cats will chase mice, and they'll eat bugs, and they'll eat birds too. You're not going to stop a cat from being a cat. But
Right.
what can we do as human beings? That's the question.
We have cognitive value, so we can choose to have a leather purse or let the cow live. You know, we have choice. We also have our evolutionary process has allowed us greater choices, I think. I'm coming from a psychological standpoint.
And on that choice, if you and this number is always a little hyperbolic, but the choice of every year that you are vegan or even plant-based, I'll give plant-based people this too, you'll save hundreds of animals' lives. So if you think of that, just leaving animals off your plate 3 times a day will save hundreds of animals' lives every year.
Yeah.
However many years you're vegan, Alistair, you've saved 20 years of hundreds. I mean, do the math. That's a lot. You know,
Right.
that's a huge
A lot.
accomplishment. That's a huge accomplishment.
Oh,
And if we can
thanks.
all spread that and help other people leave animals off their plates, we're making that conscious choice.
Now, I had asked you that question earlier about the mouse in my apartment, and I know there's probably more than one mouse, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The reason I say that is because as humans, my field is psychology. You know, I don't want to see the cute kitten in the alley die, so I take it in, but I'm not taking the rat in. You know, you know, we don't see things across the board. We are partial, we are impartial sometimes. I just think the awareness that you brought to me today about the agriculture and the effect it has on the animals and the planet, even, it has greatly opened my eyes. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome. I'm glad to hear that.
One of
I'm
the things.
looking for more advocacy on that issue.
Bill, you have something to say?
Well, I have something to say. Yes, I many years ago, actually, there was a very big. There was this book that came out called "Diet for a Small Planet," and I was up in Amherst, Massachusetts, and there were people up there who started reading that book, and we started, becoming more. Basically following recipes, and eating out of that book. And I haven't really continued to do that, but we live here in the Midwest, and we buy from a person who basically raises all plant. She has there's a farm. She's a farmer. She's called and has a farm. She's what is called the Happy Holler Farm, and basically all of her products are plant based. So we basically eat a lot from that, but we do go to the farmers market, and we'll say, well, we really want something a little bit different than just trying to make everything. Trying to make spanakopita so many days a week, or how much yogurt and granola can you eat, per week without getting tired of that sort of diet. And that's sort of where I'm at, is that I can, like you say, I can eat a vegetarian or a vegan diet, quite well, but I can't do it, every day, because I just get tired of it, or it's just hard to feel that that it's appetizing all the time to continually, eat that sort of stuff. I mean, my wife made a soup this afternoon, which is all mushrooms, wild rice, and we put some burrata in it. It's an Italian cheese, a big clump of Italian cheese. So that was sort of our protein source. And there is, of course, eating as what was done with the Diet for a Small Planet was to try to figure out how do you balance, these different grains and legumes and things like that, and eggs, etc., to get the proper nutrition that you need. And it's possible to do, but it's also, it doesn't always.
Well,
It doesn't always feel like you're eating. Put it that way.
it's interesting. I know a lot of people start off trying to be vegan, and they think being vegan is just not eating meat. So you leave the meat out of the dinner, and then they drink beer
Mhm.
and they eat crackers. I mean, you have to learn how to cook. With one problem, of course, is that anything that's prepared, like burgers, which are mainly made out of black beans, they're really expensive compared with animals, with meat, which is, of course, if you buy a lot of beans, as we do, soybeans, all kinds of beans, you don't you get by that. I mean, this idea that you can't get enough protein, that's ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah, the
Right. Yeah.
everything has protein in it.
Oh yeah.
What-
Yeah.
Hey, Joshua,
yes.
did I cut you off again?
Oh, you're fine. I was just gonna, if I may interject into that.
Yes.
There's this myth that veganism is really expensive. And after my doctorate, I was a plant-based vegan. I mean, I was plant-based vegan. I was a food stamp vegan for a long time. Because that was what I had in front of me, and I had to survive on that, and I was totally fine. I was totally healthy. And on the black bean burger point that it's much more expensive. Sure, if you go to the grocery store and buy the frozen patties, they're usually more expensive than the frozen beef patties. But we're also looking at the really fancy vegan option, but are you comparing it to the really fancy beef option, or are you comparing it to the low end meat option?
Right.
If you're comparing the fancy to the low end, it's two different ballparks.
Right.
But I'll tell you the cheapest way to make it is to take some dried or can of black beans and
Right.
mash them up and add some spices and add some breadcrumbs if you so dare, and add some mushrooms or whatever you want, and
Yeah.
ball it up and make a little patty and fry it or bake it or do whatever you want. And actually, Michael's had my black bean burgers before. It's like 4 ingredients, and
Right.
they're really cheap to make like a week worth of black bean burgers, or like a dinner party worth of black bean burgers. It's like $3. To
Yeah.
feed, I don't know how many people were there, like 5 or 6 people at least.
Yeah, I
Cool.
think I can attest that like whatever Josh has done here, like the cooking is like really nice and brings me back to when I did consume all kinds of animal products at different points in my life. For me, I'm pretty easygoing with it, so I don't eat animal products, but I don't care that much about the food. But I know that like people who learn to do it. I'd be curious, Josh, like how did you kind of learn to prepare all the different food that you do?
There is although he is an advocate for eating animals, or was an advocate for eating animals, I was always a big Anthony Bourdain fan of his writing and his commentary, and you kind of remove the animal injustice out of it. But he has a line, and I'll paraphrase because I won't use any explicatives on the YouTube stream. But he says, "You pay people more money to mess with your food less, to touch your food less. So the more raw, quote unquote, the food, the better. If you go to Italy and you ask them to prepare a pizza, It's like three things. It's tomatoes, dough, and cheese. It's not all of the stuff that we preservatives and stuff we add and the stuff. So when we look at the black bean burgers and we look at the ingredients, it's a bunch of stuff. And we look at the beef burgers and it's a bunch of stuff.
Right.
We're paying people more to mess with our food more. But if we just make something like a mushroom, mushrooms are relatively cheap depending on the mushroom. Beans are cheap depending on the bean.
Yeah.
Mix those things together and there you go. And it also tastes elevated because if you go to a gourmet restaurant, you're paying them for their labor to prepare foods that taste fresh, right? You're not paying for like the super deep fried Wendy's thing, right? That's full of stuff. So, I mean, I think that's my philosophy to answer Michael's question a little bit, to approaching food. The less I can do to an ingredient, the better it will taste. And pairing things together, the less I mess with it, the better it usually is.
Oh.
But I think I was cutting John off, so if you could.
Oh, you didn't cover you off, no, but I'm glad that was informative. I just want to ask one final question. You mentioned PETA. What are some of the other advocacy groups that I might be interested in, and what are some that I should stay away from that might be not sincerely advocacy groups? Or are there any groups I should just stay away from, and they just want my money for the animals and it doesn't go to, you know? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. I actually won't disparage any groups, mainly because I don't think there are any that are really that egregious. Okay. I mean, I think there are people who are less effective in their communication, and groups that are maybe less effective currently, but all of the messaging kind of fluctuates, right? Are we testing this messaging out? Are we testing that messaging out? So I do a lot of work with an organization called the Humane League, and I can advocate for PETA. I think PETA does great work in general. Michael works for Mercy for Animals. I think Mercy for Animals does a lot of great work. But I do a lot of organizing with the Humane League, which actually started here in Philadelphia about 15, 16 years ago. And it is specifically working to end animal agriculture. And it does that through welfare campaigns. So it does that by advocating for, and the website would be thehumaneleague.org. And I can link that or provide a link if you're interested. But it does that through welfare campaigns, of corporate campaigns, of lobbying corporations to go cage-free or to go free range or something. Understanding that's not the end goal, but in doing so, the corporation has to invest in different infrastructure, and it costs them millions, if not billions of dollars every year. And we do that through corporate and public campaigns that then changes the industry. Because what that does is it diminishes the impact of the industry, and it alters the way in which they have money created, their income, their quote unquote sustainable model. And if we can create those incremental steps, that's what will change a lot more than my ideal revolutionary radical overnight we all go vegan and we all have empathy for the animals. Realistically, that's not going to happen. The ideals in the Humane League are rooted in liberation of animals. However, the practice is in the incremental reformist change, the slight reform, taking those baby steps, right? But it's rooted in the end goal, ending animals raised for food, for the reasons I discussed: global food insecurity, climate change, empathy for animals, also individual health. And on that point, I will say there are typically two camps of animal rights activists. There are the abolitionists, of which I consider myself an abolitionist. I want to abolish the exploitation of animals raised for goods, including food. And then there are the reformists, or the animal welfarists, who seek to make more humane slaughter, more humane raising for food. In many ways, the Venn diagram is more, it's a big circle. It's just the margins that we disagree. Because we all want to end the suffering of animals or greatly reduce the suffering of animals. So if we can root our beliefs in abolition and accept the concession of reform and push the reform forward more incrementally, that's all I can ask for. I don't know, did that answer your question a little bit?
It answers it very logically,
Okay.
Yeah,
very, very logically. You,
Michael has been involved in an action trying to stop the suffering of shrimp. Can you say something about that, Michael? Because it's actually very, very interesting. And I mean, when you spoke about that, that's why we wanted to, and we that was the impetus for inviting Joshua, which is okay. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose that was like kind of the conversation that led us here.
Yeah.
And yeah, Josh, it's just been like great to hear you speak, and like I've been learning a lot today. Um, so the shrimp thing, this actually jumps off of what Josh just said about our sort of like welfare reforms, incremental reforms that can move industries forward in a practical way. So basically, it turns out that, well, I guess like a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, in its roots, there really started to get together some groups of like very nerdy people interested in some of these causes, trying to figure out where we could make like the most, and I use the term we loosely here, um, uh, but where we could make the biggest real tangible steps forward, like measurable data-driven steps forward, for the most animals, and the most sentient beings and the most suffering. And part of the thinking there was like, let's try to be extra open-minded and maybe do a couple things that are a little bit weird. Well, it turns out that like years of research later, because we're talking about folks going in and learning things about the 250 different species of animals that are referred to as shrimp, and reading all the papers on their sentience, their suffering, what we know about their cognition, relevant elements of evolution and things like that, as well as like understanding the industries, which is a lot of wild catch of shrimps, but more and more now, fish, shrimp, other aquatic animals are farmed as well. And it's just been in the last few years that the world has reached the point that about half of the aquatic animals that we consume are now farmed. So partly we're sort of depleting the oceans, and the other is we're just coming up with these like industrial systems for raising the animals. So anyway, turns out that shrimp are arguably, and I think very well, arguably very well measured as the most farmed animal in the world. And you might be surprised by some things about shrimp. So they live a year or two, even in the industrial farming conditions they're in. They can be really little. They can be pretty big. Like I guess I'm holding my phone, but they can get to a foot long or so. And they're smarter than you would think. So there's actually a lot of just like holes in the research out there about what they think and feel and how they interact. But by and large, when we do know what they do, they're like actually like fairly intelligent. And they feel pain, they exhibit pain responses in a number of different ways. And like all these sorts of things that scientists would come up with to test. And they're an odd little creature for sure. Anyway, the data is surprisingly good, is what I'm trying to say. And so some folks put together a group called the Shrimp Welfare Project, which is like a really small group of just a few people who've been going around to the shrimp farms all around the world, and just like understanding how the processes work and trying to figure out what are ways that we can improve, like the myriad ways, what are the worst ways that these animals are suffering across all of these farms, and what are some of the practical things that can be done. And that started happening over the last 5 years or so. And it reached a point more recently where we actually know some things that can be done today to help just improve the lives of billions of shrimp. There's about 250 billion shrimp on farms alive at any given point in time in the world. So for each of us, that's roughly 25 shrimp. Even if you don't eat them, right? Like it's there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so we know ways that we can improve that, but a lot of that's not being taken up. And I've been fortunate to be working, as someone mentioned, with Mercy for Animals, and we just started doing some campaigns with consumer-facing corporations, so with grocery stores, starting in the UK, to just say, hey, like, have your supply chain adopt these better welfare standards for the shrimps. In the last like 3-4 months, the top 2 biggest grocery stores in the UK, Tesco and Sainsbury's, committed to make these changes in their supply chains. We're working on Asda, which is the 3rd biggest right now. And I'll stop talking in a second, but I will send a link to a little web page where, if you'd like, which I think would be a meaningful thing to do, you can pop on there and send a little message that tells Asda that they should treat their shrimp slightly less badly in their supply chains.
You see, there's so many different levels here. First of all, there's abolition of eating all animals. But secondly, it's if you're going to eat animals, make sure you treat them humanely. It's really what I'm hearing.
Well,
Do you think, Joshua, do you think there's any possibility that people will stop eating animals?
I believe that, unfortunately, if that is the case, or maybe when that is the case, it will be out of necessity. Because again, we cannot sustain to feed everyone on this planet a diet of animal products based on the numbers alone. So out of necessity, a lot of people are not eating animals because they can't survive eating animals. They cannot afford to eat animals. And I believe that as we inch closer to the climate crisis becoming even more severe than it is, we're going to have to face this at some point and say, okay, we can no longer cower to big pharma, big farms, big ag, and continue to give money to this system of exploitation. So I do believe it should be in our future, or we will suffer because of it. And the animals, of course, will suffer because of it. But going back to your point of, if people choose to eat animals, it should be humanely. And the question that a lot of abolitionists, it's on the tip of our tongue every time, is there a humane way to kill? And the answer is usually no. So if you can provide me a humane way to slaughter, maybe we can have that discussion. But there's no humane way to slaughter. And that's just not to police language, but that is the thing, to fight back on the entrainment that we have for our language to be, oh, it's leather. Oh, it's a hamburger. Oh, it's humane. And I know that I say I do a lot of work for the Humane League. So it's kind of a play on that. It was a play on this 80s band called the Humane League. And they were big fans. And I kind of wish they were not the Humane League, even though it's kind of a cool name. It gives a bad rap because in the community of animal activists, people think, oh, it's a humane slaughter organization, when in reality, it's an abolitionist organization.
Yeah.
Sorry to deviate from the.
It's interesting because I mean, occasionally I like to look at cookbooks, and it's always if you want to make bread or you want to make cakes, eggs, butter, milk, and it's like, no, you don't. Well, I mean, one thing too, we were talking about black bean burgers, and if you add flour, you add flaxseed. Flaxseed works instead of eggs, and then people don't know that. I mean, it's just. There are so many ways you can substitute for things. Yeah.
Yeah, I had Michael comes to one of my board game nights, my weekly board game nights, and I have another neighborhood board game night on Thursdays, and I'm the only vegan there, but it's three other guys, and we meet late at night, and we play nerdy board games, and I tend to make vegan snacks and food for them, and just however many nights ago, 4 nights ago, 3 nights ago, one of my friends said, I've never had food here that wasn't amazing. And he goes, as a matter of fact, I've never had vegan food that wasn't amazing. And I made them chocolate chip cookies. And he goes,
Mm.
tell me the ingredients. And I went, flour, oat milk, a little vegetable oil, chocolate chips, and vanilla extract. Oh, and a little baking powder. So that's 6 ingredients. And I just eyeball it. But it's just those 6 ingredients, you bake it. I don't need any eggs to bind, to provide anything. I don't need any, I guess I used oat milk, but I could have used water even. It's you can just omit things and usually it works. We don't need to add all of this stuff to make it richer or whatever.
Oh, everything falls apart if I don't add flaxseed for me. So maybe you're better at that than I am. You haven't talked to us about your music. We need a little bit of music. I mean, we already over time, but I want to hear about your music.
Sure.
And those are
Yeah,
records
forgive me
behind
for-
you. Those are records behind you, right?
Yes, there are. There are some records behind me. Actually, hold on. I'm going to step off camera for 1 second. Because I just happen to have a record I put out last year. It's a 12-inch classic LP made on recycled vinyl. So eco-mix vinyl. So it's recycled things. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but just in general about music, I've been interested since I was a very young kid. And I won't give you the whole spiel, but I went through conservatory training and all of that. And during my studies, I was invited to work on music or do music analysis of humpback whale song with a man named Roger Payne, who recently passed away. But he was the first to ever record humpback whale song in the 70s. And he developed like hydrophones to capture this underwater sound and phenomenon and do analysis of it. So I was doing a lot of research and analysis on humpback whale song and discovered some things and patterns and behavior which pointed to humpback whale intelligence. And why that was important to me was because it creates empathy for whales.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't be whaling, we shouldn't be killing, we shouldn't be ruining their habitat. And if this is what we need to create empathy for people to wake up and say, maybe we should stop overfishing, then so be it. So creating music with whales, creating music from whales, presenting the music that whales themselves create was really important to me. And expanding beyond that, during my doctorate, I would go out to Des Moines, Iowa, to this place called the Ape Cognition and Conservation Initiative, which was a rehabilitation center for bonobo apes who had been raised in captivity over here in the United States. And this provided as close to the natural habitat as they could. But what further prompted me to organize more for the animals was their high level of intelligence, where I would drum on drums with all of this family of bonobo apes, and their pattern recognition, their ability to synchronize with music, their ability to hear some pop tune and play along with it as though it was nothing, no problem whatsoever. And we were able to create and develop experiments to, have all of these kind of findings that were quite interesting, which grew into a since abandoned project, but I thought was really cool, of an interspecies research project involving bonobo apes, African elephants, bottlenose dolphins, and sea lions, and their pattern recognition, because all of us working in these fields were able to detect a high level of pattern recognition and retention of memory and rhythmic entrainment, so their ability to learn something. And we were creating experiments that could kind of work with one another with overlaying data and points. It was an ambitious project, which is why it kind of just, it was too much too soon. So maybe we'll come back to it when funding returns and things like that. But my music making, to return to this, why I mention this has always been tied to non-human music making and the music of nature and the music of the natural world. But as a human being, as someone who lives in industrialized places, my music is also very interested in the human world and industrial sounds and mechanical sounds. And so this record behind me, I was fortunate enough to have a residency at this place in Philadelphia called the Recycled Artist in Residency, which is at a dump. They hate it when I say that word, but it's at a waste treatment facility and a recycling facility, what we usually refer to as a dump. And so I took all of these musical instruments that people were throwing away, and I took away common household items, and I took all of these kind of objects and sounds of workers and sound of the breeze and sound of birds, and I recorded it all onto discarded 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch magnetic tape, right? So reel to reel and cassette tape that I found at the dump. So I recorded all of this to tape with microphones, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 that I had in my collection, found at the dump. And I recorded sounds of the dump, excuse me, the waste treatment facility. And I then took all of that and I made a very long, a 40-minute composition out of it. And then I took these little transducers that are on this gong right here, which I also rescued from the dump. And that turns any object into a speaker because it just vibrates the object and turns it into the cone of a speaker. So I took a 40-yard dumpster made completely of metal, and I attached 2 dozen of these transducers and turned the dumpster into a speaker and performed the composition inside the dumpster. I was playing the samples and the things like this into the dump, at the site, through the vessel, where all of these things were at one point contained. And I recorded that, and that is on this record, which is called Recycled Soundscapes. And it's printed, it's cut on and pressed on recycled vinyl. So vinyl that is discarded, that they melted and reconstituted into this. So it took from the waste stream sounds, it took material from the waste stream, and it returned it to the waste stream metaphorically. And now it can be enjoyed by listeners on wasted vinyl, on eco vinyl. I think you're muted.
Can we hear it any other way?
I'm sorry.
Can we hear it any other way? Or do we have to have a record player?
Oh no, it's
record.
online. It's on
Oh.
yeah, if you go to my website, which is just my full name, joshuamarquez.com, you can find a link to it. If you're on Spotify or YouTube or things like that, you can search my name and the title Recycled Soundscapes, and it should appear. But it's all sounds from the dump. I mean, I have other music too, but those 2 things of the human impact and the animal impact are
It's great.
appropriate for this talk, I think.
Okay, anyone got anything else to say apart from wow? And anyone got anything else? Alistair, you have something?
No.
Okay. Donna, got any comment?
Only I apologize for coming in late. It's a really complicated question, but simplistic in a way. Like, I have no problem giving up any fashion thing. I do not buy anything leather. But when you were born and raised, as I was, as just a poor kid in South Philly, like, and somebody who's eaten because of the suffering of animals all our life, where do you begin? That's my and I know it's simplistic but very complicated. So if you want to email Susanna a recipe for where does one start to honor animals and to honor the planet more?
I'll do you one better. If Susanna gives me a way to deliver you, or I'll contact with you directly. I'll give you a cookbook. I'll give you a
Okay.
plant-based cookbook. It's 100
That's-
recipes. Yeah, we'll meet up. I'll find you because you're in South Philly. You're not that far away.
No,
Um,
no, I was born and raised, I'm in Jersey, but I'm in the park with Susanna and Michael on Tuesdays.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll give it to Michael.
Okay.
Michael, you're still here. I'll give you a cookbook this Tuesday so that
Oh.
a week from this Tuesday,
There you go.
you'll get it within like 10 days. How about
And
that?
then, and then,
Sounds
That's
good.
beautiful. Thank you very much.
and then Donna can invite everyone for dinner. Yes.
Hooray.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, you won't want to eat that at the beginning of.
Okay.
I mean, I know what I know about.
Yeah.
I've been so upset and wanting to honor humans on the planet, and
Yeah.
just by the way, everybody, I was very distraught, and I'm going to definitely have a peace vigil on November 23rd in 10 o'clock in the morning at Cooper River Park, and I'll provide the address in Jersey. So it's a peace vigil, and we all will take a peace pledge, because I couldn't think of anything else to do to honor people and the planet under our current circumstances. I have to do something. It's like really returning to the 60s. All we are saying is give peace a chance, and for people, and I'm now committed to animals. So thank you very much, Susanna, for arranging this. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
Michael. Something else too. EQUAT is a Quaker organization that's very interested in climate change.
Okay.
I don't know what there was a big parade through West Philadelphia yesterday, the Peoplehood Parade, and they were there, and they had this wonderful pterodactyl. It was very cool. It was very cool, and there was a klezmer band. It was great. But EQUAT is very much focused on. Well, they're focused at the moment. Well, for some time they've been focused on Vanguard, because I'm not quite sure what the issue is with Vanguard, but they've been protesting about Vanguard for some time, but they protest about other things too. And
Okay.
I think there probably is some sort of connection there. And at the moment, we're all getting ourselves organized because we don't know what's going to happen. But everything's connected.
Yes, it is.
It's interesting. In Puerto Rico, I go to a Episcopal church, and there's an Episcopal priest there who used to be an executive in the oil industry in Saudi Arabia. And I said to him once, tell me something good about oil. And he said, well, the good thing about oil is they stopped killing whales, because they used to always have to kill whales for lamps. And then once oil was dug out of the ground, they didn't have to kill whales anymore. I mean, and that just blew me away. Here, I mean, I couldn't have imagined that. So everything, these unintended consequences, yeah, all over the place.
Right.
Okay, I think you must be exhausted. We'll probably end about, do you have anything final to say? Any direction to lead us on, so we all
Sure. So I can plug a few things. The first would be an in-person event, which is coming up this Friday. Wow, it's coming up quickly. November 15th at the American Vegan Center in Old City, which is run by the American Vegan Society, the United States' oldest vegan organization. It is a monthly event that I organized on behalf of the Humane League with Revolution Philadelphia and the American Vegan Society of animal rights activist meetup. So you can learn about a lot of vegan, veg advocacy, and animal rights organizations, meet some other activists if you're interested. It is at 6 p.m. on Friday, November 15th. It is the third Friday of every month. And we're having free pastries. So if you're curious about, and Michael, you had some of these last month, some really amazing chocolate chip cookies by Fat Badger Bakery, which is also a terrific name for a bakery. They're sponsoring the event. I think they're giving us more chocolate chip cookies, which I ate too many last time. But it's a great way to have if you're interested in getting, active in activism for the animals on behalf of the animals, or learning some resources. You don't have to be a vegan to go. You can be vegan curious. You can be interested in veganism or animal activism, or just ask questions. I mean, we're here to organize activists, but also to reach out to those who have questions, because that's part of what we're trying to do in general. And the second thing I'll plug, the last thing I'll plug, is specifically for the Humane League. If you go to the humaneleague.org or type into Google or Bing or whatever search engine, the Humane League and the Fast Action Network, you can take a bunch of actions that are very fast and easy, such as emailing Hilton Brand to go cage free, or calling a Dunkin' Donuts executive, or do a manager letter drop off, or submit a form, much like the link that Michael sent in the chat today on behalf of Shrimp. But there are a number of actions you can do right from the comfort of your own home, or if you'd like to organize in person with us at the Humane League as well. But feel free to come out on Friday, and Susanna, you have my contact information, and feel free to share with anybody interested to follow up with me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or have any conversations.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much. Okay, let's yeah.